Hi, welcome to Peak Moment. I'm Janaea Donaldson. My guest today is pretty expert at going local and is in fact the author of a book about that. I'm with Michael Shuman. Join me. Thanks for being here.
Nice to be here.
Actually, two books, Going Local and the Small-Mart Revolution. That's a great title. So what's that about?
The Small-Mart Revolution is about all of the money we leave on the table because we are foolishly buying things from outside our community which we could be making for ourselves. And if we make things for ourselves, if we localize our economy, we are able to generate more income, wealth, and jobs, and thereby have the resources to solve a whole bunch of social and environmental problems that we can't touch right now.
So what you're saying is we're buying things from China, from all over the world, right? And not making them in our own communities or in America. I mean, all those jobs that have gone offshore, right? Why is that a problem? I mean,
well,
they're coming back cheaper, more people can have more. I'm going to be a little devil's advocate on that. Why?
Well, the truth is, just to set the context, that America is a relatively self-reliant country. I mean, remarkably, we only import 16% of our gross domestic product. And if we were attentive to the trade deficit, we would be importing a lot less. Now, that's just imports overall. If you look at localization more specifically about how much of our economy is rooted in local businesses that are primarily focused on local markets, that's about 58% of our economy in a typical county. And that's local small businesses, nonprofits, and government institutions. And of course, in rural communities, that's an even larger number.
Sure, sure.
So for the most part, we are already fairly self-reliant. And there's a number of reasons why we're going to become more so. For example, right now we consume mostly services, not goods.
Ah, okay.
And services are inherently local. You need a trusting relationship. Hard to get a massage over the internet. Some people do, but most of us like a real person there giving us the massage.
So in a service-oriented, I can see that it's people, it's relationships.
That's right.
Part of that.
And if you had to create a kind of a bumper sticker about what is local economy all about, it's a relationship-driven economy as opposed to an anonymous-driven economy. It's an economy that cares about not just the bottom line in your pocket, but also the bottom line on people and the environment.
So if you're doing all those bottom lines, you're thinking, I'm sure, about the fact that if you keep the businesses local and so on, more of that money is still circulating in your local economy, not going elsewhere. Is that that's one piece of one bottom line?
And indeed, this is not just theoretical. There was a study done in Austin, Texas several summers ago looking at the impact of $100 spent on a Borders bookstore versus 2 local bookstores. And the $100 spent on the Borders led to $13 circulating in the local economy. $100 spent at the 2 local bookstores led to $45 staying in the economy. So roughly speaking, for every dollar you spend at the local bookstore, you got 3 times the multiplier impact, 3 times the jobs, 3 times the tax collections. And the reason for that is that local businesses spend more of their money locally. So the Borders did not have local management. The local bookstore did. The Borders did not use local accountants and lawyers. The local bookstore did. The Borders didn't have a stream of local profits coming in, and the local bookstore did. The Borders doesn't advertise in local newspapers and radio stations, the local books. So when you add all those things up, you see how across businesses, local businesses contribute much more to economic well-being.
You still run the, question here is, when you lay out, at this point we have cheap goods. Now let's look at the materials stuff, right? Some of which we no longer manufacture. Can we even find some of those goods even being made in America? Some of the things that are being made less expensively over in China and imported across. Of course, that's based on cheap oil, cheap gas to get it here.
And that is a huge caveat, because all of the billions of dollars invested in China for people to get very low-cost labor is vulnerable to 2 things. One is, as the price of oil goes up, the economics of shipping goods across the world begins to sputter. Yeah. The other thing is it's very vulnerable to democracy. So, you know, if and when the People's Revolution ever really occurs in China, suddenly the whole Walmart production model is going to be thrown into chaos. I think it's inevitable that those two things are going to happen.
Both of them.
And that's going to make a huge difference for local economies. I mean, price of oil is hard. The rising price of oil is hard for a lot of consumers and, you know, people on limited income, no question about it. But it's great news for local economies in several ways. People are going to use their non-local cars less. They're going to be much more interested in smart growth. They're going to be conserving energy, which keeps energy dollars local. And they're going to be producing more goods locally and distributing them locally because those are going to be more competitive against Walmart production and then shipment from China to the US.
Let me ask you for an example about that, about it will become cheaper. And that makes sense. When the transportation costs rise, at some point it's going to be cheaper to get my peaches from my local grower than the cheaper peaches that are being shipped over from China. And I give that as a real example because one of our local growers indeed says that the worst thing for his business is the cheap apples and so on that are shipped over as apple juice from China. He can't compete with that at this point. But at some point, he will be.
Well, I think that point is going to happen very quickly.
Really?
The problem with local food systems right now is that over the last generation, we've neglected all of the distribution points that used to connect farmers with local markets. And instead, everything has been globalized. But the truth is that economics is increasingly favoring local food. And I'll give you some statistics that help to highlight that. 100 years ago, when you spent $1 on food at a market, something like 40 cents went to the farmer, the rest to inputs and marketing.
Okay.
Today, when you spend $1 at a market, 7 cents goes to the farmer. 71 cents goes to marketing. And marketing is things like refrigeration, packaging, middle people, advertising. So, all right, so 71 cents for distribution, 7 cents for the farmer. When you start looking at that carefully, you realize even really inefficient farming, small scale, tiny scale, biodynamic, you name it. So let's say it costs, instead of 7 cents, it's 14 cents.
Okay.
If you get rid of most of that 71 cents of garbage that's rooted in the global distribution system, you can deliver cheaper food. And so that's why, in principle, we are beginning to see the spread of community-supported agriculture, urban farming, farmers markets. It's all being driven by the improving economics of local food.
That's exciting. I mean, it feels like part of the job of reclaiming our communities back. And part of that is having a local economy, or people aware of that. How do you people start to change their thinking in this way?
Well, a group that I work very closely with, the Business Alliance for Local Living Economies, BALE, and has, at this point, about 40+ chapters around the country, several tens of thousands of businesses. BALE tries to work with the communities in raising awareness, both among small businesses about what are all the opportunities for them to compete, but also among consumers. What are all of the cost-effective things that you ought to be buying at local stores? I mean, think of it this way. Right now, everyone believes that the chain stores have the cheapest goods. That may or may not be true.
That's right.
But it's
the belief is there.
The belief comes from billions of dollars of advertising messages that we take in every year.
Right.
If we can begin to put out just a little bit of information, for example, my employer is the Training and Development Corporation, is based in Bucksport, Maine. And in the state of Maine, every year there is a survey of pharmaceutical drugs and their prices.
Okay.
People in Maine were surprised to learn that actually local pharmacies had cheaper drugs than chain pharmacies.
Really?
With Walmart falling somewhere in the middle.
Okay.
So that is good information, get it out there, and it begins to displace the advertising that tells you that bigger and chain is cheaper.
That's there's a wonderful maverick quality to this. It's like, we really are better local. I mean, just notice that they're feeding us a line. that came up for me personally when I contacted our local stationers, found out what the cost of my inkjet cartridges were. It was $1 cheaper over at Staples, right? $1. I will put $1 towards my community for every one of these. I mean, and support that happening. They were cost competitive. Actually, the prices were equal for quite a while. So it's like. But most people, I think, thought that Staples would give them a better price.
Well, even, and I mean, I will grant that a lot of people who are interested in the local economy maybe will still have to choose for, their own family's well-being. They'll have to choose the cheaper prices and go to chain stores. Mm-hmm. That's okay. I begin my book, Small-Mart Revolution, with the words, nobody is perfect. I'm not perfect. I talk about, in the beginning of the book, my shopping adventure at Walmart, and that's sort of the frame of the whole argument in there. But the point is that it's a mistake to try to look at every piece of celery you buy and say, is that local or not? That's a waste of time. What is important is to look at the big ticket items. Mm-hmm. The single largest expenditure that we make is on housing. That's about a third of family income.
Yes, okay.
Okay? So housing money is either going to a landlord or it's going to the bank in a mortgage.
Yes.
Making sure that your landlord is local and you are moving towards ownership, or making sure that your bank is local, is probably the single most important act of localization you can do. So you can localize all the celery and food and underwear you want, but at the end of the day, what you do with your housing is going to be far more important.
Interesting. Now, you would be saying here is that your mortgage is through your local bank or credit union, right? That leads to the thought for me of the investment money for businesses, that businesses getting started, wouldn't we want to be saving in credit unions and businesses that are local, and particularly those that go back and lend to our businesses, that are local businesses?
Well,
how does that work?
Here's the thing. Because of the Community Reinvestment Act and because of lots of innovation, we actually know how to do cost-effective, small-scale business and personal loans now across the board. There's been a real revolution in credit and banking finance. That's the good news. The bad news is that 6 out of $7 that are in the financial sector in the United States have nothing to do with banks. They have to do with mutual funds and pension funds and trusts and bonds and stocks. And the thing is, there is absolutely no local content on any of those things. Right. So here's the perversity. About 58% of the economy is localized right now. You would expect that something close to 58% of our investment money would be going into those local opportunities.
Yes.
And in fact, almost nothing is. So all of us, including the people who are listening to this conversation we're having, all of us who buy local and bank local, nevertheless, our pension funds are sitting in the Fortune 500 companies we distrust while we systematically neglect the local businesses we care about. That we have to change. And I think one of the ways we can change that is to try to create stock issues for local businesses and create local stock exchanges that will enable us to then move our pension funds and move our mutual funds back into the local economy level.
Bingo, bingo. You see a local stock exchange. Now, that requires, actually that takes, the notion that you have of a publicly traded or a business entity, a corporation that limits the geographical location of its stockholders was one idea that I read of yours that went, so the lights went on. I was like, can we even do that?
I mean, think of the Green Bay Packers. The Green Bay Packers is the only team in the National Football League not owned by a single obnoxious individual. Okay, and back in the 1920s, they decided they were going to create a community stock-held team. Now, it's a nonprofit, so it's not a perfect model. But the result is the Green Bay Packers never thinks about moving to Cleveland or Baltimore. They never threaten. You don't build me a stadium or give me several tens of millions of dollars. That's what Art Modell in Cleveland did. We're out of here.
Right.
they are always going to be in Baltimore. They're always going to be generating wealth. They're always going to be a source of civic pride. That's what we need to do with other pieces of our economy, is to localize the ownership through local stock.
How does that work? I mean, if I were coming to you from a community and say, how do we even get ourselves started on this? Are there models? Are any communities doing this yet? How do we go about it?
Well, it turns out that back in the 1930s and early 40s, when the Investment Acts were first created, they very much envisioned that states would still have their own parallel security systems, and that stock could be created for local companies that was tradable only within states. Very few companies actually take advantage of this, and very few states have tried to build this system. But the legal framework is there, so we just have to sort of dust it off, and we have to bring it up to date a little bit. But I think this is going to happen. I mean, there are examples that you can find out there. I've got a chicken company that I've been developing on the eastern shore of Maryland. In a sense, it's like the Green Bay chickens.
Okay.
And the idea is that we're creating a stock issue in the state of Maine. You have to be a resident in Maine to hold the stock.
Okay.
One of the ways we're going to try to market is a picture of my grandmother, Grandma Ann from Russia, saying, "Chicken stock is good for you." And chicken stock is the way that we're going to finance the company. And it will be an asset for the people of Maryland in perpetuity. We're going to say, Tyson and Purdue, every time the state of Maryland thinks about regulating 1.5 billion pounds of chicken manure that potentially can go into the ecosystem of the Chesapeake Bay every year, what the companies come back and say, you regulate us, we're out of here. We're going to go to Georgia or Arkansas, and it's a credible threat, and regulation is kept off the table. Our approach as a chicken company will be fundamentally different. We want higher regulation, and if they leave, great. We'll pick up all the slack.
Okay.
Because as a community-controlled company, we're going to behave with respect to the environment and labor and to community well-being in a fundamentally different way.
What you're saying is that's where your allegiance is. You're making your roots there in the community. Now, that implies that you're also looking at the environmental factors and the social factors. I mean, you're starting to be a true, what's the right word, a substantial player here. You know, that I'm here in this community. I'm not going to up and leave.
And it's interesting because I think there is some evidence that actually political participation is greater in communities that are largely made up of local businesses. And the reason for that is that when you have a community that's rooted in a couple of big companies, you tend to get a boom and a bust. Like think of Las Vegas or the Alaska during the pipeline period. But what happens is that lots of people come in during the boom, and then during the bust, lots of people move out. And so the constant inflow and outflow of people makes it difficult for anyone to have long-term commitments to the politics. Whereas if you're in the community, for many generations, you really care what's going to happen politically.
And that's true. And I live in a small community in the Sierra Nevada, Grass Valley, Nevada City area. It's fairly small. We had the boom and bust. The gold, discoveries were huge in our era, and then, and then that waned. And then timber has come up, and that is waning because they're extraction industries, and now tourism is one of our main industries. Though that is more locally oriented, the local B&Bs, the local restaurants.
And that's right. And to the extent that tourism is locally controlled, tourism can be a good thing for your economy. If it's not locally controlled, very little of that money will touch your community.
At this point, we're fortunate. It's like it's still quite local. How do these things apply? I'm thinking of a big city. I mean, here we are in San Francisco. Of course, you're doing something does the scale of, I would imagine the model you're talking about for local investment, local stock exchanges, and so on. A stock exchange, those are all publicly traded. They still have to follow the laws, or are there different legal?
Yes, they are issued through direct public offerings that are not interstate, but intrastate.
Okay.
And then so that's a very particular piece of law. But what we envision is setting up a national platform which we've tentatively dubbed local exchange.
Okay.
And within that national platform, companies within each state and potential investors in each state can participate in the exchange, and it would be strictly electronic.
That makes sense at this time. I think that's, you put your finger on it about where all of our investment money is going. The boomers and older folk, our money is, it's like when I talk to a financial planner, it's like, well, how can I invest? Where do I invest? And just here, I would love to be able to put seed money towards, a biodiesel station or the food processors that the local farmers can process and sell their goods. I mean, whatever it is. So what you're talking about is exciting. Well, how close are we to having that happen, in reality, do you think?
Yes. I think it's very close. I see the trends are moving toward localization as we speak. It's moving,
that's a cell phone that's talking to you,
yeah.
right?
That's one of the localizing trends. No, the trends are moving toward localization for several reasons. One is that distribution of globalization is getting more and more inefficient. Another reason is the growing service economy, that people increasingly are trying to get their services out of real people who live nearby, rather than goods from far away. Homeland security is moving us toward greater degrees of self-reliance. The internet is allowing more and more of us to work out of our homes and basically to do all kinds of jobs from anywhere you want to. It just opens up a whole new horizon of opportunities, for example, for rural communities. The dollar is going to shrink over the next decade or so because of our gigantic trade deficit, and that means that imports are going to get a lot more expensive, and that will push us toward localization. As people get more environmentally sensitive, they will naturally try to favor local food, local energy, to create more self-reliant communities. So all of those trends are pushing us in the right direction. And here's the remarkable thing, which is that over the last 10 years, during this period of robust globalization, local businesses have only lost 3% of their market share to non-local businesses.
Is that all?
Now, we think the number is higher because we're focused on retail. And in fact, in many retail sectors, local businesses have lost a lot more.
Right.
But retail is a tiny part of the US economy. And so if you focus on retail, the news is very bad. If you focus on the rest, the news is quite good. I think it's remarkable that they've only lost 3% ground because we, in our law, systematically disadvantage local businesses. For example, every year, state and local authorities give $50 billion in subsidies to non-local businesses. The feds give about $63 billion. That's $113 billion of pork that is advantaging non-locals and disadvantaging locals. We have antitrust laws that are being ignored now, and that allows Walmart to do things that 25 years ago they never would have been allowed to do. We have tax laws which actually give companies a tax break when they leave town and then a tax credit when they go international. So that advantages global businesses against local businesses. We have laws in trade law that make it illegal or problematic if you want to promote local purchasing in your community. So all of these things stack up as great ways that we have systematically intervened in the market to try to help global businesses. And I say, if we simply follow a libertarian theme, forget about going green, if we simply are libertarians and wipe out all of this foolish economic development that is done to serve the global business sector, we will have the Small-Mart Revolution.
That's hopeful. I mean, that's encouraging. I get the David and Goliath picture when you're talking about all of those forces working against, and they've only lost that little bit of ground.
Goliath is on steroids administered by the government. If we have a fair playing field, Goliath will fall.
Yes. So, in our last 2 minutes, other thoughts that have come out of your experience in sharing these ideas with other communities?
Well, I think that there are many strategies that we're starting to see around the country that really are not being used by economic development. And just to mention, I mean, trying to mobilize consumers to buy local first, very important.
Okay.
Trying to get government purchasing agents to buy local first.
Okay.
Trying to build networks of local business so that they can compete more effectively than they would if they were just going it alone. So, for example, True Value hardware stores are global networks of local hardware stores that work together through the producer cooperative to compete effectively against Home Depot. We need to set that up among more small business industries. We need to think about how to develop these stock exchanges and move community finance another step. We need to systematically revise our laws to remove all of the advantages that are enjoyed by TINA businesses right now.
TINA, what's a TINA business?
That there is no alternative to the global economy.
Right.
The invocation from Maggie Thatcher that has driven so much of the pork that goes to global companies.
And so who's the counterpart? Who's the counteraction?
The counterpart is LOIS.
LOIS.
And LOIS stands for locally owned import substituting businesses, basically businesses that are in your community and selling first and foremost to your community. Those are the businesses that we know, besides being cost effective, contribute much more to community well-being. And so I'm not saying we should oppose TINA businesses, the global businesses, but I am saying that smart public policy will systematically focus on LOIS businesses and let TINA take care of herself.
Sign me up. I'm for LOIS. Thank you. This has been wonderful.
My pleasure.
Thank you for joining me. You're watching Peak Moment, Community Responses for a Changing Energy Future. I'm Janaea Donaldson. Join me next time.